Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Risk Matrix with myself, Dr. Martin, and my sidekick, or I'm his sidekick, who knows?
No, I'm your sidekick.
James Junkin, and we're here to
Hey,
talk
roll
today.
tide, man.
Roll Tide. It's almost football season. We're here to talk today to Mr. Corey Silverman, and he's with Highwire, which is a Veriforce company, and we're going to talk a little bit about his background and how he got into safety, and we're going to rough him up a little bit with some questions to make him a little nervous before we get started. But before we do that, James, what do you got for us today, ripped from the headlines?
Hey, rip from the headlines. OSHA, you just put this out. They're giving us a little bit more breathing room when it comes to the comment period. If you haven't been keeping up, if you're a safety professional, especially if you work around chemicals that cause cancer, carcinogens, there's a big push right now OSHA has to make some changes to the 13 proposed rule updates for the carcinogens, if you will, from those chemicals. So you've got a comment deadline now on August the 21st. They've extended that. If you want your voice to be heard, now is the time. If you've ever thought about how OSHA writes the rules, head on over to regulations.gov, go down, find the docket for the 13 proposed rules updates, and hit your comments, send in your takes. So that's workers, that's safety pros. Hey, if you work around asbestos or lead or some of the other ones that cause different types of cancers and are chemicals I can't pronounce, this is a good topic to have at a safety meeting. Workers want to be involved. Here's a chance to be involved. Break it out, talk to them about it, go over what the changes are. A lot of the changes relate to how the respiratory protection program is being implemented. Some of it's real common sense changes. I like some of them don't like, but hey, OSHA wants to hear from you. But you have a deadline, August the 21st. August the 21st. So the clock is ticking, baby, just like the days are before we kick off to Alabama football roll time.
When is the first game, James? Oh, did I stump the chump?
First Saturday in September.
First Saturday in September. We don't know the date, but the first Saturday in September, James will be unavailable.
Yes, I will be unavailable.
And Corey, if you're not an Alabama fan yet, the more you know James, the more you're going to become an Alabama fan, or at least you're going to act like one, like me. See,
he's already tried to convert me.
Right?
Yeah,
Roll Tide.
He
Get you some gear.
We'll get you some gear.
So like I said, we have Corey on. Hi, Corey.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
So we came to Corey both from different aspects here. James and I both know Corey. James came to me and he said, I'm speaking with this kid, Corey, and I'm sorry I called you a kid, but to me, you're a lot younger, probably half my age. But he said, I'm speaking with this kid, Corey, at this conference. He says he knows you. And I do know Corey. And Corey and I met through Keene State College back several years ago now. We reconnected through a mutual kind of work situation in between. We'll get to that in a little bit. And now he's found his way to Highwire, which is a good place to be because he gets to interact with James and I on the reg and present with James. So welcome, Corey, to the show. We're going to talk a little bit about your background, put you on the hot seat, and talk about how things are going over there as a safety specialist for Highwire.
Sounds good. Let's get into it.
So let's talk a little bit first how you and James ended up at a conference together speaking.
Yeah, so I was asked to go and attend this IPMI conference in Nashville. It was pitched to me as a conference of safety executives, and they said there was a speaking opportunity here to work with James Junkin, who I know was the chair of the Veriforce Safety Advisory Board. And so it was just a really cool opportunity to get to work with James, hear some of his background, and present on a topic to a bunch of safety leaders.
So James,
it was really cool. So what we had is a think tank type presentation with I think it was 12, 14 leading safety professionals, in which Corey and I put out some of the issues we feel that are the most challenging right now across a variety of industries, not just those that are in construction industry, related to how do you really know when you're managing contractors that worker that shows up, that subcontractor employee that shows up on the job site, is qualified from a job perspective, from a skills perspective, and from a regulatory perspective to go out there and perform the work. So we talked a little bit about stories that we had in the past of incidents that led to litigation, that led to workplace injuries, production delays. Corey came and spoke about how he used to do it when onboarding contractors. And so at the end of the day, some of it was about risk, but a lot of it was also about being ready to work. Did I get that right, Corey?
Yep. Work readiness is how we called it.
So, I may be super qualified in my job, but I also need to be able to get my background investigation done, my drug test completed. If there's a site-specific orientation, what were the methods that our companies are using to get all this completed, knowledge, skills, and abilities verified, so when we show up on the job, we can get ready to work. It's really cool.
So I'm curious what you guys think of the intersection of that and temporary workers and short service employees. Did that come up at all? Who's responsible for all that stuff for these folks? The temp agencies that I've seen, they bring them in and they say they're ready to go, right? Can you trust that? And who owns that in the end result? And this is more James' bailiwick than yours, Corey. But in the end result, who owns that responsibility?
So, what do you think, Corey? Give us your take.
At least in the construction industry where I mostly come from, I would say it really falls on the GC. Even if they're a temporary worker that's not going to be there for very long, ultimately whatever happens on the site is under the GC's umbrella. And like Dr. Martin said, there's often the philosophy that, oh, they're just going to be here for a day or two. We don't really need to verify anything. Just get them on site, get them doing work, and send them on their way. But the reality is when they're on site, they pose just as much risk as anyone who's there full-time. So the importance of having some sort of process to verify qualifications beforehand, just because they're there for one day doesn't mean an incident's not going to occur.
Right. Sometimes more risk, right? Because they're not familiar with the work site. They're not familiar with how people do business. As you know, I mean, Corey and I are kind of from the same area. I said we met through Keene State, and I'm outside of Boston. I'm assuming Corey's in Boston now, or right outside of Boston too. And you can go from a contractor to another GC, and they've got a similar kind of safety feeling about what they do, but some are like way high end and some are lower end. So, I mean, you can't really tell where you kind of fit in that until you've worked with them for a while. Right. And so, a worker comes in, maybe they work for somebody who wasn't as stringent as maybe a Gilbane or some of the big boys that play around here, and they're not ready to work. They may not be ready in that day, that one day that you need them from the hall, right? So I guess that's a really good subject that you guys brought to the fore. So let's get into a little bit about your background.
I want to chime in on something real quick, because you touched on something, and since you brought it up, we might as well talk about it just real briefly. When we're talking about temporary workers, in your scenario, I would not say so much they're temporary, but you might call the hall and you don't know who's coming from the hall. So outside of union construction, when we get into true temp workers, whether we're working in manufacturing, we've got temp workers we've contracted with some agency that's sending that worker to our facility, or, we've got some job, non-union construction or whatever business. I'm running this all the time, where we're contracting with a temp agency. It's very important, first of all, from an OSHA's perspective, to determine who's directing the work. Because I see these things all the time in the contract that says, well, the temp agency was supposed to send me these folks and they're trained and qualified and ready to go, right? And then when they get there, they're not trained, qualified, and ready to go. If you are directing the work, they're just providing the body. You own that. If they get hurt, it's on your OSHA 300 law. But even more than that, I just had a fatality case along this same line, this same venue back last year, that resulted in some litigation between us and OSHA, which we'll talk about some other time, but it's a really cool case. A lot of the issues OSHA had with the contractor and the temp agency is the contract said one thing, but the practice deviated to something else. No one was really abiding by the letter of the contract. So when you had the fatality, who is responsible for the training? Well, we did some of it. They did some of it. It gets real confusing as to who is responsible. So my advice to most people is go by what's in the agreement there when it comes to the contract, but put some thought about what you're putting in the contract and be realistic. So if you're saying to a temp agency that they're going to show up and they're going to be trained and all their OSHA training and lockout, tag out and all this, I wouldn't trust it because you're directing the work and you're going to be the one responsible for it. OSHA doesn't care what it says in the contract. I had the area director sit there and say, I don't care what it says in the contract. It may have said they were supposed to provide it, but what was your process to go and verify that they were doing it? Oh, you didn't get out your checkbook. Here's your 3 serious citations. Thank you very much. Roll time.
Yep. Good point. Okay, so let's we digress. Let's get into what we told Corey we were going to do, which is put him on the hot seat about his career, right? Because as you and I both know, James, the job market's hot for safety professionals. Keene State, just because not just because Corey's from Keene State, but you can't get an intern out of Keene State anymore unless you plan a year or so ahead of time. Because every single student out of there does an internship. I think, Corey, you correct me if I'm wrong, at least junior and senior year, if not even sophomore year now.
Yeah, it wasn't a requirement at the time that I was there, but from what I've heard, pretty much every student by junior, senior year is getting them nowadays.
Yeah, and you can't get an intern, right? And similarly, you can't hire people out of there. So there's a lot of opportunities out there, and Corey's one of those people that has taken advantage of those opportunities. So tell us a little bit about what it was like. You and I met through the master's program at Keene State, but what it was like getting out of Keene State and getting a job in the late 2000s.
Yeah, it was just so cool being part of a program that does such a good job of setting their students up for success after college. I went into Keene State as a history major. And after about a year or so, I chose history just because I enjoyed learning about it. I didn't really see a career path with it. And after about a year or so, I realized I don't really see a career path here. Let me look for something else. Let me look for something specifically that will set me up on a trajectory to get me a job right out of school, go into a career. And whenever I told someone that's what I was looking for, everyone said, check out the safety major. They're great for that. And at first I was confused because I didn't realize that safety was something you could study in school. I was like, what do you mean? Safety is not a school subject. I don't know what that means. But literally everyone I talked to recommended it. So I decided, all right, fine, let me check it out. And what I really liked about it was exactly that they do a great job of setting you up for success after college, holding these massive career fairs where they bring in all the big construction companies, manufacturers in the area. You get the opportunity to meet them while you're still in school, get internships, and just be really set up for post-grad. Keene State likes to boast about how such a large percentage of the safety grads are full-time employed in the field within 6 months of graduation. And so, yeah, it's just a really cool experience being part of a program that does such a good job setting you up for success, especially nowadays when the job market in a lot of industries is really tough. A lot of people are coming out of college really struggling. And for something like safety, which is still a pretty niche market, Keene State being able to set their students up for success is really cool.
So tell us what happened to you when you graduated. Did you have a job right out of school or?
So I initially planned to do my master's right away after college, so I wasn't really job searching towards the end of the year. I started the master's program right after I graduated. And after a semester or so, I realized I think I wanted to get some work experience before doing the master's. So I didn't really start my job search until after I'd already graduated.
I tried to convince you to stay, I remember.
Yeah, you did. But ultimately I decided that I wanted to gain some experience working before continuing with that. And so I wasn't really starting the job search till after that. But shortly after that, I was able to get my first job with Amazon. So I moved down to Florida and worked as a safety specialist in an Amazon fulfillment center in Jacksonville, Florida. And that was my first hands-on safety experience.
How was that? Because I heard Amazon as a floor safety person is like some crazy pants.
Yeah, no, it was a lot, especially as my first job out of college. I was thrown onto the night shift right away. So not only was it my first job, but I was the only safety person in the building when there wasn't that much supervision around anyway. So it was a great learning experience. It's very much a throw you into the fire and let you learn on your feet type of scenario, which I think was really good for me in developing my skills and my career. But after about a year or so, I realized that I really wanted to be in the construction industry. I had had an internship in the construction industry. And even though I was learning a ton at Amazon and there was great career potential with the way Amazon was growing at the time, I just really decided I wanted to move into construction.
Okay. And then our paths crossed again.
Yeah, that sure did.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So after Amazon, I went and worked for Holder Construction for a number of years where I feel like Holder Construction is where I really learned how to be a true safety professional, especially with Highwire, where a lot of our business is in the construction industry. I lean back on my experience from there so much. But after I'd been at Holder Construction for a few years, I decided I wanted to make a switch into the safety technology world. I had been involved in the implementation of some safety technologies at both Amazon and Holder and found I felt it fit my natural skill set a little bit better than being the on-site safety professional. I really enjoyed the implementation part of it, working with the end users to make sure they were getting value out of the platform, working with the product team on feedback and ways the product could be improved. And so I eventually landed at a company called Autus in New York City, where Dr. Martin and I crossed paths again because Dr. Martin was doing some consulting work with them at the time.
Yeah. It just goes to show, James, and you and I know this, right? For as large as the industry is, I mean, there's so many jobs and so many different ways that you can take a career in this industry. Darned if I don't cross paths with people 2 or 3 times in my career, right? And I talk about this a lot. I talk about it with students when I used to teach. I know James talks about it a lot. That you never know who's going to be your boss someday, who's going to be working for you someday, who might be able to give you work someday, who's in a position to give you a recommendation, right? And those things cross multiple times during a career. I mean, I'm going on my pretty close to my 40th year pretty soon, and I know James is running right up behind me. But what would you say about that, James? Do you kind of agree or disagree? Or
Well, I mean, not only do I agree, I think it's really important, as a safety professional to protect your reputation. Years ago at PEC Safety, we used to have a old master trainer there named Gary Pohlman. And if he's listening, shout out to Gary Pohlman, right? He was one of my first safety instructors, and he would tell us in Train the Trainer, guard your signature. Guard your signature, guard your reputation. Because safety, even though there's a good many of us, it's a small world indeed. And what's that? What's the thing about Kevin Bacon? What's the saying about Kevin Bacon?
7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right?
Right. I think that's really true. The 7 degrees of Dr. Logan Martin. Roll Tide.
And James, we've crossed paths with people who end up knowing us both or know one of us and recommend to each other. But that's very true, right? That I remember Corey. I remember letting him into the master's program. Thought he was a great guy. Talked to him when he went to Amazon. Tried to keep him in the program. Popped up again at O2's. Popped up again at Highwire, right? And each time, what is? I mean, James, what was my opinion of Corey when he popped up on your radar?
Oh, it was outstanding. He said, I know that guy. That's a great young safety professional.
Right. So guard your reputation, right? Because you never know when it's going to come back to you.
Absolutely. That statement about how paths can cross really hits home for me, especially since I've come to Highwire and been back in Massachusetts. My first few jobs in safety down in Florida, down in Atlanta, I cross paths with some Keene State people every once in a while. But now that I'm back in Massachusetts, I feel like I'm crossing paths with someone from Keene State almost every week, whether it's from one of our clients, a contractor enrolling in Highwire. And people will ask you. I have people reaching out to me saying, hey, yeah, I saw this person who used to work at Holder is applying here. Did you ever work with them? Hey, I saw you guys both went to Keene State at the same time. Do you know this guy? So yeah, safety is a small world and you're going to cross paths with people multiple times.
And you're starting to see that in the position that you're in at Highwire. I probably think a lot, right? That you're a hub for a lot of people, right? You're a hub for a lot of people coming in to do their business, because really, and I explained this to James when Highwire was acquired by Veriforce, that out here, Highwire is a big deal, right? A lot of the construction companies are in Highwire. They require Highwire. A lot of universities require Highwire for a verification system. And so, you know, you're sitting on the hub now of not only the Keene State grads, but of people who can call and say, hey, do you know person XYZ, right? And how you're treated by those person XYZ is how they're going to get the recommendation or the review from you of whether or not they're a decent human being or not. So, you know, whether you like that or not, that's part of your role now, I think, where you sit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about Autus and what they did. What was the kind of the software stuff that you were doing? Because that kind of segued you into Highwire, because they do software solutions and verification and stuff like that.
Yeah, so Autus was a company that did construction safety kind of field management software. So things like tracking pre-task plans, doing safety observations, incident tracking, workforce management, making sure that workers are doing their orientations before coming to site. Then you have a worker profile. So when you're doing an inspection, you can associate observations that are made against certain workers. So you have that on their record. And then the other thing Autus did was access control. So they had facial recognition technology that they would integrate with the turnstiles on a construction site. So a worker would have to have their orientation completed through Autus, their certifications uploaded, and a photo uploaded, and then they would use facial recognition as their access to the site. So integrating all of that was intended to be a really streamlined effort on the worker onboarding and access control. You know, I've worked on sites where they didn't have that kind of technology. And so you're doing the orientation, that's all being tracked manually. ID cards are being issued. They use that to scan into the site. They malfunction. They don't work very well. So integrating that all into one, where it's one app where you're doing the access control, worker training, but then also things like JHAs, PTPs, observations, incident tracking. That was the goal, to be the one-stop shop of on-site construction safety management.
Pretty cool stuff. James, you got
So
some
that
questions?
So that helped, I guess, inform you when you went to work for Highwire. So how is it different now working in contractor management, where you're dealing with hiring clients, you're dealing with the owners, if you will, and also general contractors and then contractors that subscribe to your system. How's that past to help you in your current role at Highwire?
Yeah, so the uses of both platforms are slightly different. Whereas, like I said, Autus was the on-site safety worker management. Highwire is more the company level pre-qualification. But ultimately, what the role at Autus really did to help me prepare for Highwire is working with GCs as clients and really helping right size the software to fit them. And, you know, I knew this coming in based on working for a GC as a safety professional for a number of years. But, you know, a GC buying software is very different than your typical B2B software. GCs are in the construction world, which operates differently. It's more old school. It's less technical friendly. It's more of a hands-on process that's not used to using all these complex softwares. So it gave me the experience in working with end users who are superintendents, foremen, project managers, who aren't in the offices working on computers all day, often aren't the most tech savvy, and just being able to take a process. It's not inherently complicated, but, you know, using software is very different than managing construction on site, and being able to right size it so that for that type of end user, they're able to get value out of it.
So they can do it. So I'm seeing this too, Corey, and I'm not nodding my head as you're talking. You know, as far as we've come with technology, whether it be pre-qualification, you know, site specific stuff, inputting stuff into software, all that kind of stuff. As far as we've come, we still have a problem with technology, especially in the construction industry. And I would probably say, James, in your realm too, in oil and gas, people are using the software, but they're not getting full capability out of the softwares that they're using, because either somebody's building it behind the scenes and not getting the input that Corey's talking about, or they're getting the input, but they're not checking to see if it really is user friendly when it rolls out to the customer, right? And I know we're talking, apples to oranges here, because one was implementation software and Highwire's subcontractor management and pre-qualification. But still, it becomes a daunting task for people. I mean, I can't even tell you. There were a number of times before you were on board at Highwire and before I knew James, when I would call into Highwire and say, I have a PhD and I don't understand this. Tell me what I'm supposed to do here. What button am I supposed to click? And, not that says anything, because I'm not super, super smart either. But, if I can't do it, and I actually have less work on my plate than a superintendent and foreman, then we've got an issue, right? I mean, I've got unlimited time working for myself for the most part. Think about somebody who's under a time crunch and they've got to get something done, right? Or get pre-qualified through a program. So, I think your skills are probably pretty translatable, doing customer service, customer success.
Yeah, and that was a big goal of mine as I made the transition from on-site safety into working for these safety technology companies. I felt like when I was back out in the field, I used a lot of softwares that were just clearly built by someone who had never actually been on a construction site, never been on the manufacturing floor. And again, when you're building even if you've built successful software for other businesses in the past, building something for a construction foreman or superintendent to use is very different than building something for a financial services company to use, just as an example. So a big goal of mine in this transition was to be able to help our teams to have the perspective of someone who's been out in the field, understands how things are actually operating on a day-to-day basis, and use that influence in the product and the workflows behind the product so it can be successful in that environment.
So I want to back up to that, your transition though from school to the workplace. A lot of my experience with safety professionals, they really don't start out as early as you did in your career choosing safety. Safety sort of chooses them. I think, and we were looking at the average age of a student at Columbia Southern University is 39 years old. They've been working in the trades, or they've been working in safety as a practicing safety professional for a long time, and they decided to go back to school. So your path's a little bit more traditional path. What advice would you give to someone who's about to graduate high school, or has a child that's graduating high school and looking for a career path? What advice would you give them in looking at safety as a career?
We touched on it before. It's a really tough job market in a lot of different industries right now. There's a lot of questions for some people of, is going to college even worth it? Because I'm going to come out of school in a lot of debt into industries that aren't even hiring. And safety is really the opposite. The safety industry is booming right now. GCs, owners, all different industries, they need safety people. And it's, I feel like it's still a career that no one really knows about. I feel like I probably wouldn't know about it if I didn't randomly go to Keene State College. If I had gone to another school, I probably would have stuck with history and then didn't find, because I didn't find.
You'd be a history professor by now.
And yeah, who knows? Maybe I'd be teaching history somewhere. But again, I really found it by chance. And there's still, even though it is growing and more schools are starting to offer it, it's still not something you're going to find at most schools. So I guess my advice to that person you just described would be, even though you haven't heard of it, don't write it off. It's a great field that has unlimited career growth. You can go into so many different kinds of industries. It pays well. And most importantly, there's a major need for it right now when so many industries, people are struggling to break in the entry level.
Yeah.
Okay,
James,
I want to follow up. I asked that because I have a follow-up question. So you went to school, you graduated, you get your first job, fresh out of school, as a safety professional on a construction site. Corey today, looking back to Corey on that day, what advice would you give young Corey?
So my number one piece of advice would be befriend the workers, understand the workers, understand what their processes are. They're the true experts in their craft. And so when I started out, I had some pretty major imposter syndromes, because all of a sudden I'm on site and I'm directing the work of these people who have been in the trades longer than I've been alive. And I'm also thinking, like, wait a second, in order to do my job, I need to be the expert on the processes here. And how is that going to be possible when, again, these people have been doing this longer than I've even been alive? And as I grew in the field, I learned that as the safety guy, you're not often going to be the true expert on the processes that are taking place. Your job is to collaborate with the people who are the experts on the process and ensure safety is being thought of beforehand and during the operation. So the best thing a young safety professional can do is form relationships with the workforce, the ones who are true experts in the craft of what's going on site. Because then when you need them, it's going to be so much easier to engage them. And that's when, whether you observe something that needs to be corrected or an incident takes place, you need to investigate that, or you're just trying to plan out the work. Having a relationship with the people who truly understand the processes and what's happening is going to help you out so much. And I can think back to a few times early in my career where I felt like, I have to set the example as the safety guy, and I need to, I see something that's not being done correctly. I need to put my foot down and ensure that's being enforced. And I look back now and how is this welder who's been doing this for 25 years going to feel when this 22-year-old who doesn't know anything comes up to them and says, you can't do that. That's not safe.
Don't do that.
Exactly. And then they're like, all right, what do I do?
You're doing it wrong, sir.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what? I never say somebody's doing it wrong. My question is always, why are you doing it like that?
Yes, exactly.
Because honestly, what you just described and what I tell a lot of people coming out of school is be a continual learner, right? And know that you don't know everything. You learn a lot of book stuff in school. Now, Keene State's a little different because you do get the internships and they do some practical stuff. I think they had summer boot camp when you were there and all that kind of stuff where you learn a little bit more than the average safety student does. But in general, you get out with your book knowledge, your book learning. And does it apply? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, James and I, every day we go to the regulations, pull something out and say, you can't do X, Y, Z. But it's not that simple as you just described, right? It's not that simple because a lot of times work still has to get done. And I'll let James pontificate about this because he gives a better speech than I do, but work still needs to get done. And there are different appetites for risk, right? And there are places that we can't go, and we have to balance ourselves between all of those while still having a good rapport with the people that we have to keep safe. So, I think, for your young years, that's pretty wise advice. I think it's sound advice. It's advice that I would give. I want to jump back a little bit because, you were talking about how did you find the major, or how would you get people into the major? I've got two young girls that they're coming into high school. My first one's going to high school in a week. And I think a lot about what they're going to choose for careers. And I remember, and maybe James, this was the same way with you, that you had a couple different options. You could go in the military, you could go in the trades, you could go to college and, pick something right away. And that was about it. I could be a teacher or a nurse. And, I was stuck with, I had to pick something at 18 years old and you don't, right? I think, again, Corey gave us some sound advice. Go in with an open mind. And, this is to people rearing kids that are going to college now or thinking about college. Go in with an open mind because there are some really great careers like safety. I also see a lot of safety professionals with kids who are going into the same career. Right. I know several father-daughter, mother-son that are choosing safety as a career as like a genuine legacy kind of thing. And I think that's really cool. I only know my own generation and the ones that follow me, but I think that's a really neat thing. And I think that's something that's becoming more and more prevalent.
And I'd follow up on that by noting that there's a lot of different paths within safety as well. There's been times I've talked to people about the safety world and whatnot, and they'll say something like, oh, I don't see myself standing on a construction site all day, or I don't see myself down on the manufacturing floor all day. And especially now as the field continues to develop, there's just so many different paths you can take within the safety world. And I mean, that's true for me as well. After a few years, I found that being the on-site safety person didn't feel like the best role for me, the best fit for my skill set. And I transitioned into this safety technology role, which is a really booming industry right now. There's tons of companies that are doing, whether it's with AI or with traditional software, are doing some sort of safety platform. And they want people with safety experience. And that whether that's in sales, customer success, product management, or a role like mine, which is really being the internal just resource for someone who's worked in the industry. There's tons of roles like that, and that's only expanding as the safety world continues to develop. New processes continue to be built in, and so I would give that advice to someone who's considering safety and someone who's in safety right now and may not feel like the role they're in is what's best for them. There was a time that I was in construction and I was thinking, I really like construction, but I don't really feel that this on-site role is what's best for me. Maybe I need to get out of safety. But then I found that there are other paths in safety that allowed me to stay in the industry, still use my experience, but in a role that feels like a better fit for me naturally.
And you know what? And I hate to say this because we don't want to lose you now that we got you, right? But this is another thing that I tell my kids, or I tell people, and I'm sure James tells this to his students as well. If it doesn't feel like right for you, then change. Nobody's telling you have to do something for the rest of your life, but take with you the lessons that you learn. And that's something that you just said without saying it directly, is you take those life lessons with you. You are a better person in safety technology, in a safety technology company, because you had those field experience, not despite, because of them, right? And if you go somewhere else, sometime after Highwire, or if you stay and move up, you'll take the experiences from this role and add to what you already have in your toolbox.
Absolutely.
In fact, nowadays, I think you should expect change. The day of joining an organization, spending 30 years with the same company, getting the gold watch, and heading off into retirement, who does that anymore, right? I know the resumes that I see for consulting jobs that we have here at Mariner Gulf, a lot of diversity. You see oil and gas guys transition into construction, transition to go work, a lot of work for Amazon at some point, which I think is great. Some of them end up in consultancy a little bit. So the one piece of advice I'd say, if you're doing that type of thing, is when you get to that new industry, learn their terminology, learn their regulations, learn what their risks and hazards are by doing what Corey did when he first got to his job. He did a lot less talking and a lot more listening, right? Because the people who do the work, they know what the hazards are, they know what the risks are, they know what the controls should be. They'll tell you where your next accident's going to be if you're smart enough to listen to them. And too many times, as safety professionals, and I'm guilty of it more than anybody, I get paid to talk. I get paid for my time and my advice. My mother said I got the perfect job because I never shut up. It's been that way since I was a kid, right? So I've got to learn to pull back and listen. It's okay to have a little bit of silence from the safety professional. And I think that's great what you said earlier. So let me ask you this. Now that you've been for a Highwire for a little while, and Highwire is now a Veriforce company, how's that experience been?
It's been a really cool experience. Veriforce has done a really cool job, I think, of integrating us within the broader Veriforce family, but also still allowing us to operate as Highwire, not forcing too much change on our clients, our existing user base. So it's almost like we're getting the resources of being part of a larger organization like Veriforce, while not being forced to change what it is that we do and the service we provide to our clients. So, when I first heard we were being acquired by a larger company, of course, there was some worry there. There was, are we going to make us change everything? Are there going to be staffing changes? Like, what's going to happen? But it's been really cool how they've absorbed us into the family, but also continue to let us do our thing and do the things that made them want to acquire us.
Outstanding. And I will say this, as part of the Veriforce team, as the chair of their strategic advisory board and longtime master trainer, we appreciate your commitment to bringing workers home safe from high hazard jobs, Highwire's commitment to SIF and PSIF reduction. You work with David Tibbetts, who I've grown to know, great, outstanding safety professional. So thank you for what y'all bring to the table, because we all have the same mission.
Yep, absolutely. That's what it's all about, getting the workers home safe at the end of the day.
So Corey, thanks a lot for coming. We really appreciate this conversation. You really hit on some high points here that James and I really believe. So we love it when people come on and agree with us and saying some really sound advice for our listeners. So we'd like to have you back at some point to talk about a technical issue. So we're gonna cook up some technical issues, bring you back, and get your take on those. James, you want to take us out?
Well, absolutely. Thank you for coming, Corey. I'm glad that you came today because I'd like for some of our listeners that have children, that have young people that are getting to go into the job market, or maybe they went to school and it didn't work out, or they said, you know what, I can't make money in my chosen degree that I spent $200,000 for. Now I'm working at Walmart because I can't find a place in the job market. Hey, there's hope for even young people in the safety profession. Corey's the living proof of it, right? So you don't have to go and work on the tools for 20 years and make that transition. You don't have to be 39 years old to go back to school and get your degree in occupational safety and health. And there are a lot of non-degree opportunities out there for safety professionals. So thank you for coming. You're the living proof that that's a possibility. And thank you if you're a listener of the Risk Matrix podcast. We just did last week our 150th episode. Can you believe it? 150th episode. We ought to be the MASH of safety podcasts. What do you think about that? Show my age, right?
151. This is 151. So let's keep rolling.
151. So let's keep doing it. Thank you for your support. Hey, you get over there, hit that like button, hit subscribe. Your mama wants you to do it. If there's something about this episode you'd like to chime in on about, we're there on the YouTube channel. We're on Spotify. We're over on Apple Podcast. You can find us in a variety of different ways that you get your podcast. But we want to thank you for your support of this program, and most of all, for Veriforce's friendship, their sponsorship, their powering of this podcast now for almost 4 years. It's been great.
And you know what? Roll Tide,
baby. Till next time, y'all keep bringing those workers home safe from high hazard jobs. We're out.